Any person who has not been treated in accordance with law or who is treated otherwise in accordance with law will have the right to go to court with his grievances, whether it is against a private person, a public servant, an official agency, or a department of the government. No court, however, shall be at liberty to refuse to enforce a law because it is of the opinion that the law is not in accordance with the principles of lawmaking. The relevant opinion for this purpose is the opinion of the lawmakers and nobody else. Fundamental rights have thus been secured in the Constitution without the complication of all laws never reaching the stage of complete certainty, because they remain perpetually susceptible to challenge in a court of law. Though it is frequently said that this challenge guarantees rights of the citizens, in actual practice, it is usually only a rich litigant who can afford to engage the best available legal talent to throw out a challenge to a law for getting rid of something that operates to his disadvantage, irrespective of whether it is to the advantage of the community at large or not, and frequently holds up indefinitely the implementation of beneficial schemes. The scheme adopted in the Constitution brings our position on same lines as the position existing in England. Judiciary will have its own built-in arrangement for maintaining internal discipline. Service rights. Service rights have been guaranteed to public servants in usual way. In respect of dismissal, removal, reduction in rank, stipulated pay, stipulated pensions, and the age of superannuation, a public servant has been given the right to go to the High Court in a jurisdiction which up to now has been called writ jurisdiction. In respect of other matters, however, like leave, transfer, promotion, etc., the public servant is only under the disciplinary control of a departmental nature, but it has been provided that he must have right for one departmental appeal. That completes the broad description of the institutions. I shall now draw your attention to the salient points of the Constitution and the reason why they have been adopted. We have adopted the presidential system as it is simpler to work, more akin to our genius and history, and less liable to lead to instability, a luxury that a developing country like ours cannot afford. The other alternative was the parliamentary system. This we tried and failed. Not that there is inherently anything wrong with it. The trouble is that we have not yet attained several sophistications that are necessary for its successful operation. For it to work, you need democratic institutions right down to villages, trade unions and cooperatives on large scale to give people training in the spirit of give and take, and dispassionate consideration of problems. You need much higher level of education, prosperity, public spirit, and integrity. Above all, you need really cool and phlegmatic temperament, which only people living in cold climates seem to have. Also, it requires long period of probation. For instance, the British took 600 years of trial and tribulations to reach this stage. Looking around the world, you notice that this system has only worked successfully in Britain and Scandinavian countries. Elsewhere, it has not taken real roots. Even France, which gave birth to liberal philosophy, has not been able to work it. So don't let us kid ourselves and cling to cliches and assume that we are ready to work such a refined system, knowing the failure of early attempts. It would be foolhardy to try it again until our circumstances change radically. In that system, the chief executive, the prime minister, must have the support of the majority of members of House at all times. If parliamentary traditions have taken roots in a country, any member of a House who withdraws his support after pledging it will have to account for it before the bar of the public opinion. In our conditions, however, there is no mechanism which will automatically operate to prevent members from selling their support or from charging a price for continuing to give support. The whole process of government thus becomes liable to be subverted in the first instance to placating those members without whose support the government in power would fail. The only insurance against such eventuality in our Constitution is to release the chief executive from the obligation of having to be sustained artificially so as to enable him to get on with the functions entrusted to him for the benefit of the people at large. Our system of basic democracies is probably unique. It is already breeding pride, hope, sense of participation and responsibility in large number of people and laying a real base for democratic society. We should do all we can to nurse it. In addition, the elected members from amongst them will be called upon to act as electoral college as described already. In other words, the broad masses of people elect the Electoral College, who in turn elect national and provincial institutions. The reason for this is simple. We are recognizing an obvious truth that the ballot can only produce a true answer if those exercising it are asked questions and level with the horizon in knowledge. If this is done, by and large, the answer will be right. The election to basic democracies proved it, and I have no doubt that inshallah the general elections will confirm it. While saying this, I am not claiming that some voters will not go wrong, but human affairs 100% result is unrealistic to expect, especially where the society is not yet matured. Anyhow, the voters will be less liable to be exploited and misled in this system than in direct election, where they were driven as cattle to polling booths. In fact, the direct election amongst us were far less direct than the system I am now proposing. In that, all you had to do was to get hold of or fix a few leading people, and the rest then followed them. This won't happen and can't happen in my system, as every one of these voters is a person of substance in his community. Another reason for adopting the indirect election system is that if we were to have direct adult franchise, the elections would be delayed for another year or two for preparing fresh electoral rolls, as the present ones are some years old. Besides, that system of election is far too expensive. It was estimated that 1958 general elections would have cost the country around 6 crores. Can this country afford such a waste? While saying this, I am conscious of the fact that some sections of intelligentsia and those with vested interest may have cause to complain. I do not see any reason why a suitable formula cannot be evolved later which will give them a feeling of full participation. The need of today, however, is that the Constitution should be brought in quickly, and that can be done only if the Electoral College of basic democracies is used for the elections. Any innovation or addition at this stage will be time-consuming and will delay the Constitution, which obviously is undesirable from every angle. I might also add that in future there will be no nominations to basic democracies. Consequently, their number will increase from 80,000 to 120,000 unless it is decided to enlarge it still further. Friction between the executive and the legislature often rises over money bills with damaging effects on the administration and developmental projects. Our Constitution, by dividing the budget between committed and fresh taxation, making the President dominant in one and legislature in another, will obviate or eliminate unnecessary clashes. I would not be a bit surprised if this formula is being tried for the first time. The wish to get good people elected is universal, but in actual fact the community makes no real attempt to help them. In our Constitution, the state will assume the responsibility of helping candidates project themselves before the electorate, who must of course remain free to elect as they like. In a presidential system, so much depends on choosing the right man. So the community must make certain that only suitable candidates are allowed to contest. In our case, a joint session of national and provincial assemblies will screen candidates. Normally 3 candidates will be allowed to contest unless the sitting president is eligible and willing to contest, in which case the numbers will be 4. We are in an ideological state, and the basis of our nationality is the ideology of Islam. Whilst making material progress, we naturally wish to do so under the umbrella of Islamic spiritual and moral values. To achieve this is a continuous process and affects every aspect of life. We have therefore provided an organization called the Advisory Council of Islamic Ideology. This body will consist of experts from many fields and will be backed by eminent research scholars. Whilst making laws, the President and the legislatures have been enjoined to seek their advice for giving them an Islamic bent. By this process, and the fact that religious education has been made compulsory up to 8th class, the curriculum in religious institutions in general and the Awqaf institutions in particular is being revised and balanced, we hope to attain our goal in due course in a well-considered and sound fashion. Notice the process laid down for the amendment of the Constitution. The variation takes into consideration the importance of different parts. Unless the President and the National Assembly agree on 2/3 majority, the process becomes more difficult so as to prevent changes being made without due consideration and in haste. In cases requiring major structural changes, it may even be necessary to refer the matter to people for a referendum. My view about the Constitution is that it should not be too easy to change, yet changes should not be made too difficult. This is the only way stability, natural evolution, and freedom from revolutions can be ensured. I believe also that in a society like ours, which is launching forth on wide education, industrialization and modernization, and is becoming dynamic, it would be necessary to look into the Constitution every 20 years or so to make it conform to social, economic, and political changes. I would commend this for consideration of future generations. Meanwhile, this Constitution can only stand as a whole. If any attempt is made radically to change any of its main elements, the rest can't stand. This must be understood clearly. This Constitution expects positive results from the institution. Having created them, it expects them to function freely within the law and produce results. It also provides built-in disciplinary arrangements in order to prevent abuse of law and transgressions and breakdown. In other words, the Constitution gives free field to do good, but it will not feel shy to curb evil. It embodies a blending of democracy with discipline, the two prerequisites to running a free society with stable government and sound administration. This, in brief, is the philosophy behind some of the salient points in the Constitution. These salient points are my humble contribution and are based on long association with the administration at the highest level, detailed knowledge of the country and the people, wide study and deep and prolonged thought, and a burning desire to help the people in building the country into a sound, vigorous, progressive, and powerful state. I believe in every word of this Constitution, and I have complete faith in it. I believe also that the country can reach its cherished goal by following it. I therefore commend it to you all with fervent prayers that God in His infinite mercy grant us wisdom, courage, and faith to work the Constitution truly and loyally for our betterment and the betterment of future generations, and above all, for vindication of faith and belief of those who, under the great leadership of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, struggled so hard and suffered so much for the creation of Pakistan. Ameen. Pakistan, Payandabad.